Miniature games need terrain. Sure, you can use old boxes, beer glasses or books, but is this really what is enjoyable about your game? The miniatures are the star of the show, there is no doubt about that. But I don't think there is any argument when I say that in-scale trees, ruins or even castles elevate your game to a whole new level. One piece that should be in every fantasy terrain collection is, at least according to my humble opinion, a house. Or even better, a bunch of houses. You see, houses give you the possibilities of having adventures in a small village, raiding a farm, and you can even barricade your adventurers or warbands in them. At least, if you have a playable interior. Another thing that is interesting about houses is that they are simply fascinating to us. There is something about tiny houses that piques our interest. Is this the same simple curiosity you feel when you visit someone's home for the first time? We just love to see how people live. And I think this translates very well to miniatures and their homes. I consider building houses as one of the staples of terrain crafting. So it's no wonder that a lot of crafting channels already did what I am about to do. Even I have already built a house on this channel. Building my Warhammer tavern, however, took a lot of time, and for this project, I wanted to have a template that would be easily reproducible for potential future projects. My hope with that is to have a complete fantasy village with a wide selection of different buildings, but all in a similar style. To nail down the look, I started with simple one-story buildings. And the basic shapes for those were these blocks of XPS foam. Normally you can buy this stuff in 1 meter by a half meter sheets, but I like to pre-cut these sheets into these blocks so I can store them better. Now the normal approach to building houses is to cut the XPS into slices, glue them together to get your rectangular base shapes. This also tends to result in walls that stand straight at a 90 degrees angle to the surface. No problem if you like this look, but I think this isn't very typical in regards to medieval buildings. No, for me these walls needed to be at an angle, more like drunkatecture than architecture. To achieve that, I set the wire of my proxen at an angle and shaved off every side of the XPS blocks. No measurements or even a plan, just cutting however I felt like it. After that I reset the wire to the standard 90 degrees and started to cut out the inside of the blocks. First I cut one side, then I turned off the hot wire cutter and turned the whole piece. I found out it's important to turn it off before repositioning, as the heat generated can easily burn away too much of the foam when it's too long in one place. Also, make sure your place is well ventilated and you wear some sort of protection that can filter out the fumes. You really don't want to breathe in this stuff. In the end, I had 5 of these here. After cutting out holes for the doors and the windows, I added triangular shapes on top of the houses. These would act as the gable. I also added smaller blocks of foam to one side of each house. The idea here was to give every building a small chimney, so I simply glued the blocks to the areas I left intentionally without windows. Now these houses were quite literally a bit rough around the edges. So I beveled the visible edges with my hobby knife and used nail files and sandpaper to make them smoother. I also drilled holes into the top of the chimney with my rotary tool. Now my idea was to use this acrylic paste as a wall plaster, as this would save me a lot of time texturing the walls with a ball pen or even gluing on bricks. But still, I wanted a few areas where the plaster would have fallen off and the underlying brick structure would be visible. So I did use a ball pen and added a bit of brick texture here and there. I mainly focused on the door ledge and the lower edge, where I added 2 rows of bricks. But I also added patches of texture on the chimney, upper wall areas or near the windows. Not too much, but here and there to break up the monotony of the plaster. Speaking of which, it was at that point that I actually added the plaster. First, on the inside. This acrylic paste is fine-grained, which means it doesn't have the rougher particles like in your standard tabletop-oriented texture paste. You can find this specific product on Amazon, but you can find similar products at your local artist supply or craft shop. If you have experience with texture paste, this shouldn't be a new revelation for you. Simply use a cheap or old brush and apply it generously to the walls. To make this stuff actually look like plaster, I use sponge pieces and dab these onto the freshly applied paste. And that's basically it. The resulting splotchy look is exactly what I wanted, as this adds to the ramshackle appearance I was aiming for. I let this stuff dry for about half a day and glued the houses onto crafting paper, which would act as a base for the following step: adding the planks. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I wanted playable interiors for these houses. And a playable interior needs a suitable floor covering. So I opted to go with these coffee stir sticks. These are simply great for in-scale wood planks. So I just cut them to the correct size and glued them in place. It may look like a time-consuming endeavor, but this goes faster than you may think. Especially if you take the time, listen to a podcast, and zone out for a bit. With the planks in place, I finished the houses by covering the outsides with the acrylic paste. Here I used the same approach as before, applying the paste with a brush and then smoothing out the paste with sponges. I also made sure to cover parts of the brick texture to get a realistic looking transition. And with all the paste in place, there was only one thing left to do. Now every house needs a roof. It wouldn't be much of a house without it, to be honest. Again, I used crafting paper to get the basic structure, but first I measured the size of the area I needed to cover. I added about half a centimeter to each side and voila, I had the size of my roof surface. With the surface cut out, I folded it in the middle and marked where the inside walls would meet the roof. These markings were essential for placing angle pieces to keep the roof at an appropriate, angle. To get the right angle, I simply took a piece of leftover XPS and traced the shape of the gables. This I cut out and glued to the paper, staying within the marked areas. At this point, you can go ahead and decorate the roof however you want. I decided to go with real wood shingles, which I cut out of 1mm thick balsa wood sheets. These were about 1 cm by 1.5 cm in size. With a wire brush, I roughed up the lower sides of the shingles. This way, the shingles look old and broken, which was exactly what I was aiming for. Now, I know this is not the most time-saving measure, and you could definitely use paper shingles like I use in my tavern build. But to be honest, I don't really like the look of it anymore. They do look like paper shingles in the end, which kinda bothers me. So I devised something of a middle way, which also helps in differentiating the buildings from one another. Instead of using wood shingles, I used wood planks. This time I made them from popsicle sticks, which are thicker than the balsa wood sheets, but already come with a perfect width. I beveled the edges with my hobby knife, remember, take care to not cut yourself, and cut them to a size that would correspond to half the length of the roof. The rest was pretty straightforward. Just gluing the planks in place, making sure they would overlap with the previous layer. I also covered the gaps in the middle with coffee stir sticks. Now on both roof variants, I covered the top with balsa wood strips and covered both ends with stir sticks. And with that, my set of houses was ready for painting. Before we go to painting, let me take the time and thank my newest patrons that joined since the last video. Sam Davis and ECB22. Thank you for helping me run this channel. You have no idea how much this means to me. Now, if you like this video and want to help me make more RPG, wargaming and crafting related content, you can do so over on my Patreon. For only €3 or dollars per month, you get access to behind the scenes and preview content. You are also able to vote on upcoming topics. But most importantly, you can help me run and build this channel. Again, thank you so much and welcome to Lenric's Realm to my newest patrons. And now, let's get these houses painted. First, I started with priming every single piece in brown. I also added a layer of green ink in a few places. With this, I added off-white ink, mainly from above. You could call all this my underpainting step, which is also almost the last real painting step for the plaster. I washed the brick segments with a homemade brown-black wash, but you could instead use a watered-down black-brown paint mix. While that was drying, I used my airbrush to paint the wood parts, like the roof and the floor, with brown and green ink. I also added a few burn marks around the chimney with black ink. With that, my painting step was technically done. I just added a bit of dirt and weathering with burnt umber and green pigments, and used light yellow ochre pigments to brighten up certain wall segments that either didn't get enough of the off-white in the first place or got too much of the other pigment shades. I also went over the roofs with a light dry brush of off-white. And with that, and a coat of matte varnish to seal everything in, this village was ready for, well, villages. Now let me welcome you to your new tiny houses. I have to admit they could have probably used some rear windows or doors, but I had playability as a main concern and I think I succeeded. I'm also really happy with the look of these. Now, what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing. Also, please leave a like and share this video with your friends. And again, if you want to help me in a more financial matter, you can either join my Patreon or leave a tip here via the thanks function. Either way, I'm really thankful for your time. If you want to see more builds like this, you can check out my mountain build from a while back. I hope to see you in the next video, and until then, farewell fellow adventurers.